Akery, editorial assistant at Bookpage, and I'm very lucky to be here today with Chris Bohjalian, author of over a dozen novels, including Midwives and Secrets of Eden. And his newest novel came out on October 4th. It is The Night Strangers and is Bookpage's October top fiction pick. Welcome.
Well, yes, and thank you so much for making it that top pick. I feel like I made a pilgrimage to Mecca coming to Bookpage in Nashville.
Well, we're lucky to have you because of the Southern Festival of Books,
Indeed.
And it'll be great to hear you read tomorrow. This is actually a bit of a different direction for you, for your normal books. It's as much as it's a psychological thriller, it's also pretty much just a ghost story when you get down to it.
Well put.
How is the process of writing a ghost story in comparison to your other novels?
You know, I never want to write the same book twice. And I will tell you that writing a ghost story was massive amounts of fun. Mm-hmm. And I didn't originally anticipate it was going to be a ghost story. I thought it was going to be an exploration of one pilot's post-traumatic stress disorder after he fails to successfully ditch his commercial jet in Lake Champlain. He's not Sully Sullenberger, and I thought that all of the ghosts that would dog him would be metaphoric. I was a third of the way into the book when he was opening this creepy door in the basement of his house in New Hampshire that I realized the metaphoric ghosts were going to become literal ones.
Well, that's really interesting because I know the first element that inspired this book was your own door in your house. And then years later came Sully Sullenberger. And so I kind of assumed that the ghost story was the original idea.
No, it really wasn't. I always envisioned that the door was simply going to be the entry to his madness. It was going to sort of be the opening to his subconscious and all of the demons that are dogging him, the regrets, the remorse, the what if. Really, I didn't expect when I started the book that he was going to be dogged by literal spirits, the 39 passengers who died in the waters of Lake Champlain.
So you always knew that he would fail?
Yes.
You always knew?
Yeah. I always knew he would fail because I remember watching the evacuation of Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson, and watching all of these passengers standing on the wings, and we understood instantly that this Captain Chesley Sullenberger was a miraculous pilot, and what he had done was truly heroic, and I wondered, what would it be like now, in a post-Sully Sullenberger world, to go through life as the pilot who wasn't Sully Sullenberger, the pilot who failed to do what Captain Sullenberger did.
Interesting. Now, not to give away too much of the plot, because it is pretty great with the twists and turns. I mean, it's just very surprising. After the pilot fails, and he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, his family moves him to the creepy house. And there, as much as the house is very creepy, there's also this element of this group of women who live in the town, and they're herbalists. But at the same time, there's very much a question of, are they witches? The whole town is just, everyone who's not in this group of women is just like, stay away from them. They're horrible. And so there's always this question of who exactly are these women? And so where did that element of the story come? Because these two main Sully Sullenberger and the door, those are very much like the beginning of it. How did these women come in?
I've always had a thing for smart, interesting, beautiful, eccentric women on the margins. If you look at my body of work, midwives, homeopaths, women who see angels, women who are strong enough to fall in love with transsexuals. Clearly, in my books, I'm into that kind of woman. And it was only a matter of time, I guess, for me to have some of those women who are a little bit sketchy, a little bit scary, and perhaps not quite as benign and well-intentioned as the midwives and the homeopaths and the angel seekers who've filled some of my earlier books.
Could you share with us your research process? Because, like I said, these are three very distant strains, and to bring them all together must have taken a lot of work.
It took a lot of research, but all my books take a lot of research. So for this book, I did the sorts of things I do with all my books. I interviewed people. I interviewed a lot of shamans, herbalists, naturopaths, pilots, a lot of pilots. And I spent an unhealthy amount of time watching National Transportation Safety Board accident simulations. Terrifying. They're animated, so it's like watching a video game, but I would become airsick just watching these recreations of plane crashes. And of course I listened to black box transcripts or read black box transcripts. One of the things though that I really wanted to understand was the sense of terror and disorientation that must occur in a water ditching, especially a water ditching that fails. What is it like to be seat-belted into an aircraft seat in a plane that's filling with water and sinking? What must that be like? And there are not a lot of people you could interview about a bad ditching. But I remember that great 1982 movie, An Officer and a Gentleman, with Deborah Winger, Lou Gossett, Richard Gere, and the Dilbert Dunker. So I said, I got to get wet. So I went to Survival Systems in Groton, Connecticut with 3 National Guard aviators, and I spent the day being dunked. And the dunker has come so far from An Officer and a Gentleman. Imagine a 35 or 40-foot long cutaway of an airplane fuselage that can be configured for 56 different aircraft that dangles above a 100,000-gallon tank of water. It's dropped into the tank, can be rotated 180 degrees so it's upside down, can be set on fire when it's going into the tank because when bad stuff is happening, often there's smoke and flame. And I spent the day being dumped in increasingly complicated scenarios, building to the one most like the water ditching that starts The Night Strangers, Captain Chip Linton's disastrous ditching in Lake Champlain. So they recreated the simulator to be a CRJ 700, his regional jet, created the flight deck, passenger cabin, and then put me in the captain's chair with a yoke, the 5-point shoulder harness, dropped me into the tank, turned it upside down, and they gave me about 28 seconds to get away from the yoke, out of the shoulder harness, open the flight deck door upside down, swim into the passenger cabin, find the emergency exit, open it, and swim to the surface. It is the most fun I've ever had, not at Six Flags or Carnival.
So it was more terrifying to watch the simulations of planes crashing rather than experiencing one yourself?
You know, it's different kinds of fear. When you're watching the NTSB animation simulations, you understand that you're watching something that killed people. That literally, for example, that horrific regional jet that crashed in Buffalo a couple of years ago in the ice storm. It's nightmarish to watch that simulation because you know that real people died. And you know that it was terrifying for them in their last moments were just horrific. The thing about the simulator is that no one has ever died being dunked. And not only was there a scuba diver in the tank with me, assigned to yank me out of the tank if I blew it, but if I completely panicked and the scuba diver couldn't pull me out, they would just lift the entire thing out of the water and it would drain instantly. So while it was scary in the way a really good roller coaster is scary, because you know that in theory you are going to get out alive. Does that make sense, the differences there?
Yeah, it really does. You know, there's a thrill to being terrified, but to a point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely understand that. And I think that understanding of that like point of fear perhaps contributed to there's also almost a whimsical element to how you recognize the madness in the story, and the moments that really get into the madness are when you switch to the second person. Yeah. The Night Strangers is told through a number of different perspectives, all women except for the pilot. And all the women are told in the third person except for the pilot, who is in the second person. And when you first use it, it is in the crash, in the opening scene. And I assumed that was just to add to the fear of it, to put you in the, to dunk you. Yeah. And it goes much further than that, as every time he comes in to tell the story, it's this you. And what were you attempting to create by using that you for this one character?
I think you're spot on. I think your analysis is absolutely right in terms of the sense of immediacy and placing you into the situation. It does in the prologue, I hope, put you on that plane with both Captain Linton and the passengers. For the next 9/10 of the book, when Chip appears, I hope it puts you into his head and gives you a sense, first of his depression, his despair, his remorse, and then his disorientation and increasing madness. I loved writing in the second person. I wouldn't want to do an entire novel that way. I think it's miraculous that Jay McInerney did that with Bright Lights, Big City.
Yeah.
I think that's just a brilliant tour de force. And Pam Houston with Cowboys Are My Weakness did a beautiful job with it in How to Marry a Cowboy. For this, a little bit went a long way. And that's why when we're not in Chip's head, we're in a very traditional third person.
Yes.
But I hope it does convey his madness and his despair.
I'd have to agree with you. My father is a pilot, and that opening scene is just horrific to experience. And then, as you go on, the whimsy that I'm referring to is this: how you're watching this man go more and more insane, but he's calm about it. He's okay with it to an extent, and I really think that could only be achieved with that you.
Thank you.
It was really interesting to watch it go back and forth.
You know, one of the retired pilots I interviewed when we were chatting, and I think you'll find this real interesting, is a pilot's daughter. He said he had a perfectly fine career, never killed anyone, never bent any metal. And I love that never bent any metal, because one of the things you know, because of what your dad does, is that you have to be perfect every day.
Mm-hmm.
There's no advancement for doing a good job, because you have to do a perfect job on every single flight. It's all about seniority. And that's the wonderful thing about all these pilots that I interview, because they fly because they love it. And a lot of people say to me, on this book tour, I'm in the middle of a book tour, and so a lot of people have been saying to me, you must be really freaked out getting on an airplane every single day. And the reality is, I'm not, because while I certainly spent a lot of time understanding when planes crash, I spent even more time talking to pilots who share their love of aviation and the fact that bad stuff happens in kitchens, bathrooms, cars. My wife is infinitely more terrified when I'm out riding my bicycle on mountains than she is when I'm flying.
Funny story that I have to tell you. When I ask my dad how he goes on a trip, he says boring. But that's the right answer.
Yeah.
You know, you do a good job. It's a boring trip.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk about the use of the women and how the women are such a strong driver of the plot. You know, as much as we're getting into the pilot's head, these women are such a strong force, and they are in so many of your books. Can you talk about how and why that happens? If perhaps you even know why women are such a strong influence in your books.
You know, my favorite review I've gotten, other than Megan's review of The Night Strangers in the October issue book page, was Library Journal 1996 for Midwives. It was reviewed from a galley, so there's no author's photo, and the review ended essentially this way. An added benefit of this novel is the candor and the honesty with which Chris Bohjalian writes about her own experiences in labor and what it must have been like for her to give birth. I've always loved that review. Now online it's since been corrected, the pronouns are not, but the original was female pronouns, and I took great pride in that because that's the first time I'd written across gender, and the first time I had women as the main characters. And it was great, great fun to write, and ever since then I've certainly found it, not entirely, but frequently, infinitely more interesting to write about women than men. And it might be because, you know, speaking as a guy, Lord knows we are incapable of having a profound conversation with anyone if we're not tossing a football or playing golf. You know, two men cannot have a profound conversation making eye contact. And that might be one of the reasons why I write so much about women.
I'd like to kind of go in a different direction, if that's okay. You, almost all, if not all, of your books are set in New England. I think moving there really triggered your voice and kind of directed you as far as what you wanted to write about. And it really interested me because so many of your books are about social issues. And you've mentioned in other interviews about how Vermont, where you live, is this microcosm where there's all these major social issues being talked about. And this, however, was a fun book for you to write, and it really was. Yeah, you can tell it really is. It was a fun book. It's kind of almost a movie, but you know, just because of how much it was a fun read. Why did you decide to stay in New England for a book that perhaps could have been set somewhere else?
Absolutely. Part of it might be the simple fact that I know Burlington Airport and I know the Burlington Departure Corridor so well. It might be just that prosaic. But I like to believe that New England has a really long, venerated tradition of great stories about dead people.
Yeah.
Whether it's Nathaniel Hawthorne or Stephen King, there are a lot of great ghost stories set in New England. And it might be because, with the exception of that brief foray to Jamestown, it was New England where the European settlers first arrived, so that's where our ruins are. New Hampshire writer Thomas More, Care of the Soul, Soulmates, talks with great eloquence in one of his books about how we're drawn to ruins, whether it's New England ruins or Scottish ruins, but we're drawn to ruins because it's a legacy of people who came before us. We can sort of sense their spirits, maybe not literal ghosts. We can get a sense of who they were, and we've got a lot of that in New England, just because we've been there since 1620, so we've got time to have ruins. And that might be the other reason why this is set in New England, because of that great history of New England ghost stories.
Well, I enjoyed that it's in New England because you know it so well, and so there is that whimsy that I mentioned. So there's jokes about hitting moose on the interstate. I mean, there's little things that help to give it that charm that are so prevalent in your novels.
Thank you.
I guess that's all the questions I had. I just wanted to ask about Southern Festival of Books to wrap it up. Have you been here before?
I have. This is my second time.
Pardon my ignorance.
No. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
A long time ago. The last time I was here was 1998.
Oh.
And I had the best time reading with Dorothy Allison. She was reading, I think, not from Bastard Out of Carolina, it might have been Cave Dweller, and I was reading from Midwives, and it was just such a pleasure to be with her and to be at the Southern Festival of Books. And the only reason why I haven't been back since is because this is my wedding anniversary. And so I've always said to Serenity and to everyone at the Southern Festival of the Books, kind of neat to be with my lovely bride. And I will be going home tomorrow to celebrate our anniversary, but I'd said no for so many times that my wife said to me, she said, "You got a new book out, you had so much fun when you were there last time, you love Nashville, it's fine, we'll celebrate our anniversary when you return."
So nice of her. Yeah. Well, we're so happy she let you go for the weekend. Yeah. Is there any author you're particularly looking forward to seeing? Are you going to take a minute to go see anybody's readings?
Well, first of all, it'll be great to see Tom Perrotta. I love Tom's work. Whether it's Election or Little Children or The Leftovers, his new book, which I think is just wonderful. The Leftovers is one of my favorite books of this autumn. Certainly it'll be great to see Charles Fraser in Nightwoods. I think, how can you not think the world of Charles's work? So I'm looking forward certainly to seeing the two of them.
Well, we are too, and I'm very much looking forward to your reading tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, and
Pleasure.
definitely check out The Night Strangers.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.